Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dehls. We are here after Monday night football, after we just watched the New York Jets get absolutely bent over. Oh, God, I hear myself twice. Whoops. We just watched the New York Jets just get absolutely bent over to the San Francisco 49ers. And now, of course, I'm here with Mr. Joel Dehls. But of course, the fans want it. The fans need it. We have Mr. Moran here on the stage as well. We had to bring him up here because we have to go and we have to talk about the team that was supposed to go ahead and blow out the Niners. It wasn't even supposed to be a game, gentlemen. But you guys were right. It wasn't a game. The San Francisco 49ers did absolutely whatever they wanted to. Supposedly, the best defense in football. We just watched Jordan Mason not skip a beat while CMC wasn't on the field. You guys saw that CMC notification, and you guys thought that the game was won before it even started. Little did you know that Jordan Mason was about to look like prime CJ2K. But hey, talk to me, gentlemen. How are we doing on this fabulous evening?
Dehls, I don't know about you, but I feel great.
I feel fantastic.
This is genuinely one of the best feelings I felt as a Jets fan personally in a while, because last year I bring myself to that moment in time after week 1, first drive of the season. Aaron Rodgers is out for the year. And then we do win that game off a great Xavier Gibson punt return. But after the game ended, my heart sunk. I knew the season was over. This year, we made it through. I mean, Aaron Rodgers had great moments. He finished the game healthy, and that's all I can ask for. That's all I can ask for. You don't know how worried I was watching this game that something bad was going to happen. From an injury standpoint, we did get our asses kicked, and that's something I will admit. And the 49ers, we showed that we're not on their level just yet. Just yet. But the way I see this Jets team improving, once we give Hassan Reddick the bag, because he earned a big-time paycheck after this game, because we had no pass rush on Purdy, I expect big things from the Jets. Now, I may have predicted the Jets to blow out the 49ers, and that didn't happen. But a blowout happened nonetheless, Dehls.
That's a fact. No, that's a fact. It's kind of screwed up because the Jets got their ass kicked. Like start to finish, got their ass kicked. They were up 7-3. Thought maybe from there we get something going. That didn't last very long, but the Jets got their ass kicked. But Joel's 100% right. Like we got our ass kicked. This is a team the Jets should be on par on, right? We did these NFL power rankings. We had all the Jets in the top 6, top 7, top 8. But you get out of this game, and you're like, last year, Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles. Today, we just got our ass kicked. It is what it is. When I look at the next 4 games for the Jets, it's New England, it's the Titans, it's the Broncos. I mean, I'm not going to be surprised if we look up in a month the Jets are 4-1. Is it a bit concerning that you're going up against a team that is kind of supposed to be on your level, a team that this should be a close game, and you go out there and Jordan Mason makes you look silly? Absolutely. I think the losses that we saw this offseason, right? We trade JFM, terrible trade, 5th, 6th round pick to the Broncos. You lose Bryce Huff, and you're supposed to bring in Hassan Reddick, and that doesn't happen. So it's basically like 3 players you're missing here that were supposed to be on this defensive line or were on the defensive line last year, and you could tell the Niners were just toying with us in the run game, weren't really able to get any pressure on Brock Purdy. But also, there weren't a lot of situations where Brock Purdy had to be under pressure. How many 39s did they have compared to 3rd and 2s or 2nd and 2s? They were easily able to run the ball, which put them just ahead of the sticks. So the whole time, of course, you're worried about an Aaron Rodgers injury. You get out of it unscathed. But they just have a lot of work to do. Luckily for them, the schedule lightens up pretty nice. And this is going to be the hardest game on their schedule. You know, like this week 1 at San Francisco is the hardest game, in my opinion. I wish it was closer. I wish they went out there and won. But I think better days are ahead for this Jets team.
Listen, gentlemen, I feel for you. As a brother of yours, I feel bad for you guys because, of course, I want to see you guys win. But, man, I must say, this was pretty horrendous. A pretty horrendous showing. First game of the season. I think we all anticipated that the Jets would at least come out and and play solid defense, especially where Trent Williams was coming back from barely practicing. Brandon Ayuk was supposed to be on limited snaps. No CMC present today. The defense was a non-factor, and I was floored to see you guys get torched whichever way that Kyle Shanahan wanted to draw up. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I didn't know it could be worse than what your defense was doing. The offense was horrendous. Aaron Rodgers really couldn't get anything going unless he was throwing the ball to Garrett Wilson or throwing the ball to Breece Hall. Breece Hall, who really didn't have himself that great of a game either, 16 carries for 54 yards, was able to get into the end zone. That was cool, but he had a fumble early on. I mean, it was one of the worst performances that we've seen from a so-called Super Bowl caliber team. Maybe like the worst I've seen since maybe my Denver Broncos the first year that we got Russell Wilson, a so-called. But now we'll see what will happen, of course. I say this, Joel, you're a smart man, and I give you credit every single time. You always find a way to put your mind at ease, and as the fans say, or as the people say, copium. Yeah, I expected a blowout, process over results. Last year, week 1, Aaron Rodgers, I knew my season was over before it even started. I couldn't even be happy about a week 1 W. But now you have a week 1 L. Yeah, your quarterback made it to week 2, but damn, he did not look good in week 1, and that's the truth.
You know, Aaron Rodgers, before this game, he was interviewed for Monday Night Football Countdown, and he said if the Jets lose this game, they're done. It's over. The season's done. And if they win, everybody's going to be talking about them in a positive light. Overall, this game doesn't really matter much. Dehls laid out the schedule. We're going to win a ton of games. We're going to have one of the best records in the NFL by week 5 or week 6. And this game won't matter. And the next time we meet up with 49ers, maybe in the Super Bowl, it'll be a different result.
I'll be honest, I didn't think Rodgers looked bad. Like,
he didn't.
Coming off a torn Achilles, compared to what we saw from Kirk Cousins, who could not even go under center, I thought Aaron Rodgers looked pretty damn decent. You know, he was able to be under center. I thought the play action game, he was able to get to it pretty quickly. We didn't see him really roll the pocket. It was like one play that he was actually able to roll that, I think, to his left. But overall, I was pretty excited from what I saw. You know, the defense was the number one thing, the reason why they lost this game. Of course, the offense was incredibly inconsistent. The run game got nothing going. The run blocking was dreadful. But I thought Aaron Rodgers' first game playing in basically 2 years. There obviously you want to score more than fucking 13 points, right? Tyrod had that last touchdown, but from Rodgers, you want to score more than 13 points. But from what could have been, right, what we saw with the Atlanta Falcons, where it was just dreadful, where we knew what was happening depending on their formation because Kirk was so damn limited in the pocket. I thought what we saw from Aaron Rodgers was at least encouraging. Now, of course, there's a ton of things that need to be cleaned up. Hopefully we get Mike Williams playing more than like 3 or 4 snaps next week. I thought we were going to get at least like 20 to 30. I was not expecting less than 10. I'm not sure the exact number, but he was really not out there at all. I don't even think he got a target. But the number one way this Jets offense is going to run is through Breece Hall in the run game, and it was non-existent today. So when you're not able to really gain first downs through the air or through the ground, so you're punting a lot, now your defense on the field even more, and the defense is getting gashed, it all kind of just crumbled down. So thankfully, they don't have to play against the San Francisco 49ers every week. Basically, every other game from here on out is going to be easier than this. But we'll see in a few weeks. You know, if all of a sudden you drop one to the Titans, you drop one to the Patriots, you drop one to the Broncos, then we could start having some real discussions saying like, okay, did we overrate this team? Or the holes on the defensive line or wide receiver 2 or Nathaniel Hackett or Robert Saleh as a head coach justified? But until that moment, I'm not going to sit here and panic over a week 1 loss to San Francisco.
Let's go over some positives. Your offensive line looked pretty solid. It looked like he was giving Aaron Rodgers a decent amount of time to process. Aaron Rodgers, you mentioned it, first game back off an Achilles. We saw him make some Aaron Rodgers-esque throws. But truthfully, I wouldn't go as far to say he looked good. He had moments of looking good. But overall, this offense left a lot to be desired. You had 4 people targeted by Aaron Rodgers. Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard, and Tyler Conklin. You guys simply need more. And maybe that will happen when Mike Williams gets a full go for these upcoming weeks that are to come. But right now, where we stand, maybe you guys just need a little bit more. And that was shown against a top-level team. And when we talk about the New York Jets, when you have Aaron Rodgers, when you have this level of defense, we're not talking about you guys just looking good against good teams, because truthfully, you didn't look good against a good team. We're not going to just talk about you guys looking good against average teams. We're beyond that. We're talking about you guys being one of the upper echelon teams and showing that you can hang with one of the top dogs. Tonight, you showed you cannot hang with a top dog, and you do have your ways to go. Maybe you can go through the scraps of your upcoming schedule and you start to gain some confidence. But right now, where we stand with the New York Jets, there's no way that you can take them as serious title contenders.
The one thing I'll say is that Robert Saleh has a lot to prove this year. The defense lost some players, but no way we should be tackling this poor. I thought a lot of the big runs were Jordan Mason breaking tackles and us not making tackles, quite frankly. The defense has to be better. Robert Saleh, that's why he's a head coach. It's because he's a great defensive coordinator. And this game was baffling. Even when we got the Niners into 3rd and long situations, I felt like there were wide open gaps in the middle of the field, and Brock Purdy would hit whoever was there. I saw Jawan Jennings have his way with DJ Reed. Debo have his way with DJ Reed. DJ Reed got torched in this game, and it was very disappointing for me. So I'm not going to overreact to this game too much. Like I said, I feel much better this year than I did last year. Last year, the season was over. I was done. There's nothing to look forward to outside of maybe a Zach Wilson good season, and that was just being too faithful in that event happening. But this year, we lost to the Niners. They're an elite football team. It is what it is. Next week, we bounce back, and then we keep stacking wins one at a time, and we'll see how we match up against the division. And with that, I'll leave you guys to do your fantasy show. I wanted to come on here to support you guys and to also give my take on the Jets, because I'm not in bad spirits tonight. And with that, go Jets and go Chiefs.
You say go Chiefs?
What do you think? And there's a reason why whenever we talk about the Jets, I feel like I have to do my due diligence to talk them down even more, Peg, because I love you with my heart and my soul. And it's unfortunate that I have to group you in with that idiot sometimes. But Lord have mercy, when you go and you say stuff like that, how can I not?
I respect that.
Is there any shame anymore? Now, like, we got to start shaming more often. But you know what? Listen, Dehls, now that he's gone and now that we're here with you, I feel bad. Because my intention with tonight was not to come up here and talk crazy shit about the New York Jets. But I'll be transparent with you. This was horrible. This was as bad as you could have imagined, truthfully.
I don't know. Maybe it's just the optimism from a Jets fan who has been through fucking hell the last 12 months seeing Aaron Rodgers tear his Achilles. I'm not like pushing the panic button by any means. Did you think we were a championship contender going into week 1?
I thought you guys were a team that can go deep and make a playoff run, not Super Bowl contenders, but maybe an AFC championship game. I feel like that was the ceiling always to me.
So has that drastically changed now?
You guys look terrible against a team that can actually go. But you looked terrible, and your defense was not supposed to be terrible, and it was terrible.
But I also think like that's if either thing had to go bad, either the offense looks completely broken or the defense gets gashed. I would rather the defense get gashed.
No, your strength is supposed to be defense.
The defense is talented. I'm not worried about this defense being a bottom 10 unit in the league. The Jets, there's a possibility the offense is a bottom 10 unit in the league. There's a realm of possibility that Nathaniel Hackett fucks this all up. There's no wide receiver too. The offensive line gets banged up, and the offense is just bad. I don't see a world that happens with the defense.
My thing is, when you look at these other teams that went out there and dominated, the first one that comes to mind, obviously, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Our thought process coming into this season was
6 field goals.
But they are an amazing defense. Their defense will carry them. They played an Atlanta Falcons team that had a lot of hype behind them. Are they the San Francisco 49ers?
You see how Kirk Cousins
Absolutely
looked?
not. But again, you had Ayuk on a snap count. You had CMC ruled out hours before the game, and Trent Williams, who is a freak of nature, obviously the best left tackle in football, he barely had a training camp himself. You had all the stuff going the right way for the Jets to gain full momentum going into this game and win this game, and you guys came out flat. You had a great drive. I can't say you came out flat because you had a great drive, even though you went 4 and out or 3 and out, 3 and out, and then you had an amazing drive, probably the best drive that the Jets have had in decades. And then you did essentially nothing the rest of the game. Defensively, you needed to be better. The Steelers are an amazing defensive team. They did that. They showed that, and they were able to use their defense to win the game. The Jets were supposed to be one of, if not the best, defenses in football. It does not matter who you go up against when you are an elite defense.
It matters.
That's not, you don't give up 32 points when you are supposed to be the best defense in the league. I don't care who you're going up against.
It matters because I saw how Kirk Cousins looked. He couldn't move. It wasn't that he just couldn't move. He couldn't plant and throw. He was throwing with just his upper body. Like Kirk Cousins, there is real concerns about the Falcons. Just can the quarterback actually play quarterback and make plays that aren't just three-step drop, quick slant, quick hitch, quick screen pass. There are some serious underlying problems with the Falcons. This is arguably the best offense in football. I understand no CMC, no Ayuk. It's the best offensive coach in football. It's the best play caller. Brock Purdy's been there for multiple years. And sure, they had everything else going for them, right? Like you mentioned, Ayuk and CMC. The Jets got a dude coming off a torn Achilles who hasn't played football in 2 years. Are we going to sit here and act like maybe that doesn't cancel out compared to the two teams?
Just coming in, the confidence in the fact that the defense was going to be great. The offense with Aaron Rodgers now healthy, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, who had his moments of looking awesome. If there really is another positive that I want to talk about, it's Garrett Wilson winning matchups consistently, obviously showing great hands, what you were expecting out of Garrett Wilson. But this offense overall is leaving me wanting more, and that's an obvious statement. Breece Hall was ineffective today. You had your offensive line, which was pretty solid, but you don't have another weapon outside of Garrett Wilson on your receiving core that can consistently win and that can actually relieve some pressure off Garrett. If they try to take Garrett out of a game and you have to rely on Allen Lazard, you have to rely on whenever he comes back and is at 100% Mike Will, and then of course Breece Hall, who seems to be the number 2 option for Aaron Rodgers and out of the passing game, I become concerned with this offense terribly, truthfully.
Yeah, I think those concerns are valid. I just listen, what the Jets went into this having a 300 level course exam where you have to go into this, and if you somehow pass, all of a sudden you're this A student and everything's going, it's roses and it's beautiful. But you go in and you failed it, and you completely failed it. But I'm not comparing this 49ers team to some other teams like we mentioned with the Steelers going up against the Atlanta Falcons, right? Or even the Buffalo Bills, who damn near lost to the Cardinals at home, and they were going up and down the field on them, right? So at the end of the day, I think what Joel said was right? And, referencing Aaron Rodgers, you lose the game, everything is going to hell. But these next few games, when you get New England, when you get Denver, when you get Tennessee, now, to be fair, you can't go too far the other way. You can't rattle off 3 straight wins, score 30 points in every game, have 3 turnovers, and all of a sudden the Jets are number 1 in the power rankings, are better than the Chiefs, are better than the San Francisco 49ers, right? You can't go crazy either way with it. But my thoughts on the Jets entering the season and my thoughts on the Jets after week 1 haven't really changed, right? This is a team that I think as the season goes on, the weather gets cold, this is going to be an elite defense. This is going to be a team that should be able to run the ball. We didn't see it today, but I think they have the personnel to be able to run the ball. And then, of course, you have Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson who could do some damage passing. So didn't look great in December, but I really do think this is a team that is built to win playoff games.
This is one of those games where I'm going to start treating the New York Jets the way that people treat Tua in December. I need to see how you look against great teams.
That's fair.
Before I moved, because your first test, although it is week 1, and that's where I can give a slight leniency, your first test, you got a 30. You got a 30 and you failed miserably. But the Chiefs lost in a close game. It was a nail biter. You guys had no moment in this game outside of the first quarter where this game was close. Like I said before, outside of the first quarter, when the score was 7-3, and you had the best drive that you've seen from the New York Jets since 2010, 2009,
2015. It's magic.
You know what? That's on me. So 9 years.
Really, the biggest issue to me on offense was the first and second down run plays. Run the ball, 3rd and 7 pass. It
Terrible.
Has always bothered me, not just with the Jets. Any offense Every stat you look at, if it is second and 7 or longer, throw the ball. You are not gaining any sort of advantage by running the ball and establishing the run to set up the pass. It's bullshit. If you run the ball on first down, that's fine. You get 6 yards at 2nd and 4, run the ball again. If you get stuffed, if you get 2 yards, it's time to pass the ball. That's the biggest concern is Nathaniel Hackett just going to do what he did last year, where he's just run the ball, 3rd and 7, let's pass. And now all of a sudden you could go up against exotic blitzes and different looks, and the offensive line could get confused. But anyway, we could get on to the fantasy stuff.
Let's do it. All right. So enough of me bashing the Jets. It's going to be a fun show tomorrow when we probably record the next episode of the full podcast. But let's get into the fantasy portion. When it comes to fantasy for today's game, actually, let's talk about it, because the big news was CMC did not play, which means Jordan Mason was going to fill in. And if you were one of those guys that ended up getting screwed on a last second CMC no playing, you didn't have Jordan Mason, shout out to Big Chuck. I feel extremely bad for you.
Though, right?
He did end up clutching out the W. God ended up working out and working in mysterious ways. But Jordan Mason, dominant. 28 carries, 147 yards on the ground, gets into the end zone. Could have had 2, but the touchdown ended up getting ruled back. I think it didn't end the matter. I think that was the same drive. He ended up scoring regardless. But gets a catch for 5 yards on his only target. It does not matter who's going to be in this backfield, but it helps especially that Jordan Mason actually has some talent to him as well. Was breaking tackles left and right, was really pushing the ball down the field. He was the offense for the San Francisco 49ers, and anything else that they did extra was built off of the run. They were able to go and run play action. That's when Brock Purdy's at his best. He's able to sit and push the ball downfield. We saw Deebo Samuel getting active, but let's stay with Jordan Mason in CMC's absence. This is a tricky one because we don't know how long CMC is going to be out for. Allegedly, Adam Schefter reported that he may not suit up next week for Minnesota either. This is where I start to have my concerns, but it's confusing because how much priority are we putting into Jordan Mason? If you have CMC, you have to make it your number one priority. It does not matter. You cannot get burned by losing your number 1 overall pick this early into the season. You need to make sure if on draft day you did not draft Jordan Mason as a backup, that you go out there, and I'm thinking upwards of 30 to 40, maybe even 50 if you're thin at the running back position in terms of fab spent on Jordan Mason. This performance was special, and this was a performance against a high-level defense that, of course, you did lose C.J. Mosley. Sarge Gardner missed a little bit of time in this game, but he ended up coming back. But it did not matter who was on that football field. Jordan Mason was unbelievable tonight, and I think that we really have to consider him because we do not know the severity of this CMC injury.
And Jordan Mason said after the game that he was told on Friday that he would be the starting running back. Shanahan also said after the game that wasn't true. That feels like something that Jordan Mason was supposed to keep internal and not let the media know. If it's true, which, listen, we don't know, that means there's probably something more wrong than CMC other than the report of, oh, he woke up today, went through warm-ups, and something just didn't feel right. I don't know if it was a setback. I don't know if the injury that first occurred 3-4 weeks ago at this point is something more serious than getting let on, because don't forget, when this injury first happened, right, CMC was talking to reporters. He's like, oh, if there was a game today, I'd be playing. That was damn near a month ago at this point, and now there is a game, and you are missing it. But these are always the trickiest ones, right? When you're having a guy who is as elite as Jordan Mason, and there were some plays where the offensive line, it was just creating holes, and he was hitting them. But there was other times there was no holes, and he was creating yards. And he was running through dudes. He was running through tackles. He's athletic. He's explosive. He's strong. 28 carries is fucking insane. And this is a guy that should be a backup running back, right? I think Joe Mixon is the only running back this week who had more carries than what Jordan Mason just had today. But if you have CMC, first of all, should have drafted Jordan Mason in the last round of your draft. For sure. But if you didn't, like, shout out to Big Chuck, I'm blowing 50% of my fat. There's no playing around here. You cannot screw around with losing out on Jordan Mason because, listen, CMC, he'd come back next week. I wouldn't be shocked if we woke up tomorrow and CMC gets placed on the IR or he misses a week or two just to be safe. Listen, the 49ers are already 1-0. They're not going to push anything in September when they know they need CMC in December and in January. We just saw earlier today Puka Nacua get placed on the IR after it was like, oh, that's like a week-to-week injury. We don't think it's too serious. But the Rams are probably feeling something similar. Let's not risk someone who has been injury-prone early in their career on an injury they have in the first week of the season. So CMC can miss 1 more games. He can miss 0. He can miss 4 more games. We don't really know right now. But you're going to wake up tomorrow on Tuesday, and you're going to have to make a decision. If you're CMC's manager, I am blowing 50% of my fab. If I am not CMC's manager, it's tough because there's some other guys out there this week, like J.K. Dobbins potentially, that could be out on waiver wires who could have longer term value than just Jordan Mason for a week or two. So if I didn't have CMC and let's just say I'm average at running back, I'm putting a bid out there. I'm not going to just let him sit, but I'm also not, blowing the bank on it just because down the line, if you do end up having an injury to a quarterback or another position, running back, for example, you want to have some fab saved up. So if I have CMC and I don't have Jordan Mason, 50%. If I don't have CMC, I'm still putting 20, 25% just as a feeler because if CMC is out, this is a dude that's a top 5 running back. Like this is a guy that's must start. You're starting him over basically everyone except like the obvious guys, the Kyron Williams, the Bijans, the Breece Halls, but he is like easily a top 5 to 6 running back and he will win you weeks for multiple weeks as long as you're starting running back. And even if you're strong at running back, or even if you have 2 running backs you love, this guy is still someone who can win you weeks early. And you can use that. You can use that down the line when, you're in the playoffs or you're fighting for positioning. These early weeks really do matter. And just because running back is a strength now doesn't mean it's going to be a strength next week. It could be another running back going down to injury. It could be, Tony Pollard's the clear RB1. All of a sudden next week, Tajay Spears gets 65% of snaps and Pollard's the RB2. So don't put 0 on him and just be like, I don't really need him, but I'm also not going crazy to just blow my fab budget on a guy that might only be around for a week or two.
Now, another guy who ended up doing their thing, of course, we understand that Deebo Samuel is one of the best when it comes to fantasy football because he's so dynamic. Can be a running back, can be a wide receiver. Today, 8 carries, 23 yards, was able to get into the end zone. 5 catches on 9 targets, 54 yards, 18.7 fantasy points. What more can you ask for out of Deebo Samuel? Amazing performances against an awesome defense. People were concerned about his separation in preseason. He came out here, was able to be great after the catch as well. Deebo Samuel, to me, continues to be safe moving forward. A nice shock, Juwan Jennings. He goes out there, he balls 5 for 5, goes and brings in 64 yards as well. This was pretty interesting for me, but my sit of the week, we would be mentioning him in the dud section. Brandon Ayuk, 2 catches, 5 targets, 28 yards. Did have a drop touchdown. Was pretty close to being an amazing, miraculous catch. A beautiful pass by Brock Purdy. But unfortunately, weren't able to connect. And Brock Purdy, let's talk about him also. 19 for 29, a pretty clean game. 231 yards. Did have a rush for 11 yards, but wasn't able to get into the end zone. It was a lot of field goals, a lot of Jordan Mason, and a lot of course, Deebo Samuel rushing into the end zone. But he played a clean game. And when it comes to fantasy football, 10 points, nothing that you're going to ride home about. But you got to give credit where credit is due. People were down about Deebo Samuel. He went out there and he shut people up. Brandon Ayuk, this is where I feel like a lot of our conversation is going to go from here on out. This was to be expected. Going up against the Jets, to me, I did not love the matchup. Sauce Gardner was awesome today, of course, in his side of the field, but he had one of those plays where Brandon Ayuk goes and he beats him off the line, creates a ton of separation, but Sauce Gardner simply too good, gets a hand in there and bats the ball down. I think Brandon Ayuk going forward is going to be completely fine. Today, he showed that he's still an amazing separator. He's still going to have the opportunity. 5 targets after essentially being a no-show the entire training camp. I'm still comfortable with Ayuk. This is not me pressing the panic button, but this game was one that I did have circled, worried about his performance.
Yeah, he was your sit of the week for a reason. Number 1, you expected him to be on a snap count. Number 2, he was going up against Sauce. That's a really tough matchup. And he even still had a chance to put together a decent fantasy day, but he dropped a touchdown. It would have been a tough catch, but that's Brandon Ayuk. That's a top 10 receiver. I think he's going to go after the game and say, yeah, that's one I got to have. But just to talk about Brock Purdy real quick, it almost reminded me of Jared Goff's performance last night against the Rams, where the Lions were able to run the ball basically whenever they wanted to, just like the 49ers today. And the only real difference is Jared Goff had one bomb touchdown to Jameson Williams that made him a dreadful start to like all right, 15 points, whatever. It's not the end of the world. But Brock Purdy, he was your sit of the week going up against a tough Jets defense. We thought it was a tough Jets defense. This was just a game plan where if we could run the ball 28 times and get 5 yards to carry, and then on the other side, the Jets are going 3 and out on like 60% of their possessions, why are we going to put it in Brock Purdy's hands that just keep running the ball? So Brock's going to have way better games going forward, right? He was drafted around QB 10, QB 11 because he has that crazy high touchdown upside with this offense and with such different weapons, so many different explosive options. There's going to be weeks where he gives you 20 to 30 point outings, but going up against a tough matchup, I'm not shocked that it's 0 touchdowns, only 230 yards for him.
And before we move on, I know you hate kickers, but Jake Moody won some people their weeks.
I see Emmanuel Brown in the chat. Shout out to you. He said scored 26 points. Jake Moody in his fantasy league.
You have to love a legacy game from a kicker. Jake Moody went out there 6 for 6. He was perfect today. And what more can you ask for?
I was like, yes, his game.
That's actually 100% spot on. But let's go on and move on to the studs and duds of week 1. Outside of this game, of course, had some pretty good performances, had some unfortunate performances. But let's go ahead and I'll kick it off here. Starting with my studs, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're just going to go and spotlight some players this week that stood out to us. So starting off at quarterback, we're going to go with Geno Smith versus my Denver Broncos. This week finished as a quarterback 7, 171 yards, 72 completion percentage. But where he was able to go and really win, did have a passing touchdown, but also did have a pretty nice rushing touchdown as well. To me, Geno Smith was one of my favorite late-round quarterbacks this season, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. I have Geno Smith in almost every single league that I'm in. I love the offense. We're going to talk about some other players on this team as well, from some studs, some duds, but there's so much talent on this team. The Denver Broncos defense is a little bit better than what I feel as if people gave them credit to coming into this game, especially their pass defense. However, Geno Smith, even with all the pressure that he was facing, was still able to go out there and put together a top 7 quarterback performance. Next, I'm going to shout out my start of the week, Baker Mayfield, quarterback 2 on the week versus the Washington Commanders. There's nothing really to brag about here on this call. It was an obvious one. Commander secondary is not good. 289 yards, 4 touchdowns. 2 of them great passes to Mike Evans. Great catches by Mike Evans as well. 29.7 fantasy points. Again, the lesson from this, you see the Commanders on a matchup, it's kind of matchup proof. You go ahead and you start that quarterback. And the last one I want to shout out, quarterback 15 on the week. And nothing too crazy, pretty average. However, if you are in a pinch and you need a quarterback to start, worst case scenario, this guy, Sam Darnold, may not be the worst option that's out there. Against the New York Giants defense, which is pretty good, was winning consistently at the line. This was one of the worst pass block win rates this past week. Sam Darnold stayed strong in that pocket. 79% completion, 208 yards, had 2 touchdowns, turned the ball over once, but 15.6 fantasy points against a pretty respectable defense with all the weapons that he has, with O'Connell as his head coach and play caller. If you, in a worst case scenario, need a quarterback to start in a 2 quarterback league, there's maybe worse options than Sam Darnold right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Geno was, or I shouldn't say Geno, but I was excited for Geno this upcoming season. DK was one of my finalists for my guy until I went with Kenneth Walker. And I was like, all right, I can't have every damn Seahawk on here. But Ryan Grubb in the first half, I thought the offense was really bad, especially that first quarter where multiple safeties, 3 and outs, they weren't able to get anything going. But in the second half, we saw them cook up. We saw the touchdown to Zach Charbonnet. He looked really solid. Baker Mayfield, too. We were wondering what this would look like without Dave Canales, but so far, so good. And Sam Darnold, yeah, shout out to our boy Jer, who unfortunately has Jordan Love, and he's, going through it right now. But he has Sam Darnold as his QB3, and you could definitely do worse. I have Deshaun Watson as my QB3 right now. And we're going to talk about a guy who's on waiver wires who I'm seriously considering picking up and dropping Deshaun Watson for. So let me get to my studs for this week. Anthony Richardson. I mean, it's an obvious one. He's fucking insane. He started and completed 3 games in his NFL career. He's been a top 4 quarterback for fantasy football every single time. He had 9 completions on Sunday. 9 completions, but had 2 touchdowns, added 56 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. He was, I think, in our top 5. Was he 6 for you, or was he number 5? He was in our top 5 for a reason, and if he's healthy, could easily finish number 1 overall and probably has a pretty easy path to do that. Jaden Daniels is another one that we were high on. We were both had him listed as a top 15 quarterback going into this season. The rushing upside is just going to make him a lead option. 16 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's RB1 usage. That's what basically Breece Hall did today carry-wise, but he was more efficient and scored an extra touchdown on top of it. He was efficient through the air, and 84% of his yards came after the catch. So Cliff Kingsbury mentioned this on yesterday's show, I believe, or Sunday's show, whenever we recorded last. A lot of it was quick game. A lot of it is get the ball out quick, let the receivers do some action, and we saw that 84% of those yards coming after the catch. And the last one, did not expect this guy to be up here, Derek Carr. Derek Carr and the Saints offense. Now, listen, Derek Carr, I'm not going to go on a limb and say he's going to be a top 15 quarterback in fantasy, top 12, anything like that. But in 2 quarterback leagues, he's out on the waiver wire right now. I have Deshaun Watson as my QB3. I'm going to take a long, hard look to see which quarterback I would rather have. Now, I'm not going to go spend $60 worth of fab on him, but the number one thing that I was most excited for, or I shouldn't say most, I was not excited for the Saints, but after week 1, what I'm actually excited for, their use of motion, their use of play action. They were first in pre-snap motion this past week, 3rd in play action. They were dead last in both last season. When you go and look at the numbers of EPA and, drop back EPA, stuff like that, it all skyrockets when you put in motion, pre-snap motion, when you put in play action. I understand they're going up against the Panthers. Derek Carr is not going to look like this every single week. But when you look at these advanced numbers and the offense they're running with Clint Kubiak there, it's a much more modern offense than we saw last season. And I know Chris Olave had a dud week. He was not good at all. But I think better days are ahead for Chris Olave. And Derek Carr has been basically, for the majority of his career, outside of like last season, maybe like that last year with the Raiders, he's always been kind of like a QB 15 type of dude, 17 on bad years, 12 on good years. And I know he was being drafted as like the QB 27 this year. He was just left for dead. And I was there with the majority of people thinking he will not be back to a serviceable, even QB3 level guy for fantasy football. But what we saw in this offense just in week 1 is that it has the potential to be top 10 again this year.
So you're in.
Borderline.
Wow. I got to say, sometimes everyone has the one thing that they overreact with. Of course, I'm guilty of that. Lord knows. I respect you right now. Overreacting
to
the
some pre-snap motion, man.
I get it. Especially when you got some speedsters like they do have with Rashid Shaheed, and you saw him take the top off almost immediately to the start of the game. That's something that I'm definitely looking forward to. There's some guys on that offense that are exciting. It was also great to see Alvin Kamara also look very efficient, very, very back to his old ways, I should say, especially how efficient he was on the ground. That was cool to see. But again, it's the Panthers. So I'm not going to overreact too much. Let's see how you look against a normal NFL team. But let's move on to the running back studs. Do we want to do our quarterback duds just to get them out of the way? All right, let's do it. So let's go into the quarterback duds section. Now, the 3 here are obvious. I think you have, I'm assuming you got Bryce Young. I don't know if you care about Bryce Young when it comes to fantasy football. I don't blame you. But we have to mention one, the most important name when it comes to the duds in fantasy football, Caleb Williams. Simply was not good enough. 93 passing yards. Finished as the quarterback, 29, 0 touchdowns. Was not great. Not good. And listen, you and I both had him as a top 15 quarterback coming in. We believe that in this offense, it was supposed to be hard to fail. He made it look very easy this past weekend, this past Sunday. So, of course, we are expecting better days to come with Caleb Williams. The Titans' defense is a lot more improved than what they were last season. However, you weren't supposed to come out here and lay this dud. You were supposed to look a lot more polished, a lot more clean. I get it. It's your debut. You are a rookie, but 93 yards is fringe unacceptable. But of course, we are not hitting the panic button too soon. We still believe in the talent. We still believe in the person that is Caleb Williams to be great and serviceable for fantasy football. But when it came to making his first impression, simply was not that great.
Absolutely. I could get into some of my duds. So the first one I just mentioned, Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson was a guy that I think in real life we were all out on, but for fantasy football purposes, he was a guy that I thought was kind of getting slept on, right? When you look at last season, He started and finished 5 games last year. 4 of those times he was QB 14 or better. 3 of those were top 10 finishes. But my God, did he look awful against Dallas. Not even 40 rushing yards can save him, which is a lot of the damage he was doing last year when he's having those top 10 finishes. And the Browns are going to go up against worse defenses. The Dallas Cowboys last year were one of the best defenses in the NFL, even though it might be a little skewed because of their opponents. But Jameis Winston is lurking. And one thing I know about Cleveland, one thing I know about that coaching staff, I don't think they're going to let Deshaun Watson just run this offense into the ground. So I said before, I'm going to take a long, hard look into Deshaun Watson and Derek Carr, but that's really the area we're at right now for Deshaun Watson. I mean, it's so ugly. The passing offense is so anemic. They can't do it. It's really difficult to watch. And it feels like the days of Deshaun Watson even coming back to like a serviceable top 20, top 25 level quarterback is behind us. And even last year, when it was just as bad, damn near, he was still blessing us with some decent fantasy football finishes. I'll give him another week or two before I completely write him off for dead for fantasy purposes. But so far through 1 week, it's terrible. Another one I want to highlight here, Joe Burrow. He is a historically slow starter. We're aware of that. I actually have some numbers here to show just how bad Joe Burrow has been to start off his career just in the first 2 weeks. So far, right, he's been drafted, 5 years ago at this point, 4 years ago. Through his first 2 weeks in each season combined, he is 1-8. That's an 11% win percentage through his first 2 weeks. His average performance is a 63% completion percentage, 200 passing yards, 5.8 yards per attempt, 1.3 touchdowns to 1 interceptions, and a 76 passer rating. He's terrible in the first 2 weeks of the season. So again, I'm not overreacting to Joe Burrow. We know how great he is. But the one thing to just keep an eye on is, of course, he had the wrist surgery last season, kind of a odd injury, a unique injury for quarterbacks in the NFL, not something like a torn ACL like we see pretty often. But if he doesn't have the confidence, or if he maybe just isn't physically able to make some throws that we've seen him make in the past, that's going to have a huge impact on his fantasy and, of course, real life, performances. So I'm not panicked yet. Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL when healthy, but just 11 passes of 10 plus air yards. Jamar Chase was on the field. He had some opportunities to hit Jamar Chase down the field. He wasn't interested. It was a lot of check downs. It was a lot of underneath stuff. So I think going forward, he'll be okay. But coming off the injury from last season, it's not just he's always bad the first couple of weeks. It's he's bad the first couple of weeks, and he's also coming off an injury, so you have to be careful.
He was terrible. He was horrendous, especially when it comes to fantasy football. This check down nonsense, especially when you have one of the most explosive guys in the National Football League, it's not moving anyone. And truthfully, it needs to be cleaned up. I respect the Patriots defense. That's one thing, fair. But again, you were supposed to have an improved offensive line. Really didn't see that. You have Jamar Chase, who that was your big concern, whether or not he was going to suit up. He went for 6 for 62, if I'm not mistaken, and also had a stomach bug. Fair. But this offense lacked juice. And, of course, Joe Burrow at the helm, taking these quick checkdowns. The offense had nothing. We need to see them bounce back. I'm not hitting the panic button either because, of course, I respect Joe Burrow. I still think he's one of the most talented quarterbacks in the National Football League. But you got to be better than what you gave me this past Sunday. Last guy I want to highlight when it comes to the quarterback duds, it's got to be, of course, Justin Herbert. Now, he's an interesting case because they won the game 22-10. He was able to get into the end zone once, but $162, only threw the ball 21 times, but they dominated on the ground. This is exactly what they wanted to do coming into the season. They really wanted to establish themselves as a run-first offense and relieve some pressure off of Justin Herbert. This is one that I am concerned about because these weapons aren't all world. I get that the Raiders' defense is definitely respectable. However, I don't know how I feel with Herbert moving forward, especially if this run game is going to be this dominant. Of course, you can play off the run, play action pass. Of course, that opens up the passing game. However, again, Ladd McConkey was able to get into the end zone. Josh Palmer, QJ. This isn't great. It's not fun, but winning is ultimately the Chargers' end goal. They did that, but at the result of Justin Herbert being quarterback 24.
Yeah, Herbert was one of the hardest players this offseason for me because the talent is like, oh, this is a top 5 quarterback. But for fantasy, it was just someone that I don't think I drafted Justin Herbert in a single league because what the Chargers showed us this offseason was we want to run the ball. And Justin Herbert, we're going to make it kind of difficult for you to have a good statistical season with the weapons you mentioned. So I think especially in 2 QB leagues, right, in 1 quarterback leagues, I think there's a ton of options out there week to week you could go with. But 2 quarterback leagues, this is a guy that's probably your QB2 most weeks.
All right, let's go right into the running back studs of the week. Some fun guys here, but number one overall of them for me, my brother, J.K. Dobbins. RB3 this past weekend, of course, before Jordan Mason. The rankings will be adjusted after this performance of his. But prior to Jordan Mason, RB3, 10 carries, 135 yards, 13.5 yards per carry for those that need a little extra help with math. Was able to get into the end zone, had two runs of 20-plus yards. He looked awesome, looked fast, looked elusive. Of course, his vision has always been great. It was awesome to see, especially because what we've been preaching, what we've been saying, if he's healthy, he's one of the better backs in the league. And in limited opportunity, a lot of this production came in the second half. But when he was able to get his opportunity, he made the most of it. He is the best back in Los Angeles. I believe that with my heart and my soul. I've been saying this. He's one of the more talented guys that does not get that recognition because he can't stay on the field. If he's healthy, he's good to go, and he showed it this past weekend. Now, next, James Conner, another one of my...
Before we move on, I think J.K. Dobbins is like number one priority ad, right? It's like him, Isaiah Likely, of course, Jordan Mason. How much fab are you blowing on J.K. Dobbins?
If J.K. Dobbins is available, and like me, I have a league where I'm desperate at my RB2 right now. I have a dud that we're going to be talking about in Raheem Mostert. I'm worried. I'm thinking about spending an insane amount of money to bring J.K. Dobbins home. I'm thinking 40, 50. If I'm really, really desperate and I don't know if I can make what I have work on my team, in this rush offense, I understand that he's a risky kind of play because of the injuries. I don't know if I would push over a 55, but I'm definitely leaning spending half of my fab because this Chargers offense is 100% going to rely on the run to be their bread and butter to win them games. And J.K. Dobbins, if he's going to be this efficient, if he's going to be the guy that the Chargers rely on a consistent enough basis, to me, I feel comfortable spending half my fab.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. If you're desperate, like I think Raheem Mostert's a great comp there, a guy that you drafted one running back probably in your first 2 or 3 rounds. You waited Raheem Mostert, maybe he's that guy. You see week 1, it didn't really shake out that way. Miami struggled to run the ball entirely. It wasn't just Mostert, it was Achane. It was really whoever got out there in the backfield. But if you're in that situation where RB2 is a real question for you, hell, even if RB3 is a question where you have 2 guys you like, but you're like, damn, I have nothing behind them, I have no problem dropping 50 to 60% of my fab on J.K. Dobbins. To me, Gus Edwards is such like an average to below average running back. And J.K. Dobbins, I wish he could have just housed the last 20 yards and gotten to the end zone and been like, I'm fully back. The speed is fully there. But I thought the burst was there. He was able to break some arm tackles. Obviously the top end speed he got caught up to, but still, if that was just from the 50-yard line instead of like the opposing 30, that's a 50-yard touchdown. He doesn't get caught. But I thought overall you have to be really happy from what you saw. Kadami Vidal wasn't that involved in this offense. Then Gus Edwards just wasn't efficient. I mean, J.K. Dobbins is 10 carries, 130 yards. He's still the most efficient running back in NFL history. So if you're desperate for an RB2, even an RB3, get aggressive with J.K. Dobbins.
Next on my studs, of course, got to give some love to a guy that I was pretty high on coming into the season. Of course, that's James Conner. Finishes as the RB9 this past week, 16 carries, 50 yards. Not good, not efficient, but the opportunity that he was seeing, saw 19 total touches, had 3 catches on 4 targets, 33 yards, 17.8 fantasy points because he was able to get into the end zone. James Conner to me is one of these guys that I absolutely love this season because he's going to be a workhorse. Especially in this Arizona offense. I love James Conner for this upcoming season. Keep sending him out there. He was probably one of the best draft picks available because of his value. RB9, get acquainted with this so long as he does stay healthy. And the last guy I want to show some love to, this is his backfield. This is his team. It's Devon Achane. 10 carries, 24 yards. Not good. But where he makes up with it, 7 catches, 7 targets, 76 yards, gets into the end zone, 19 and a half fantasy points. And that touchdown was in the red zone. They gave him opportunity at the goal line. Last season, that was Raheem Mostert. All of that was Raheem Mostert. But on week 1 versus the Jaguars, who are a pretty solid rush unit as well, they go out there, and of course, they send Devon Achane out there to finish as your RB5 this week. If he's going to be this heavily involved in the pass offense with his speed in full PPR leagues, all the hype this offseason for Devon Achane was 100% worth it and 100% sound, because right now in this high-powered of an offense where they started out slow, he was one of the few that actually were getting going early on in this game. But if he's going to be this involved in the offense, the sky's the limit for this guy, and he can have a top 5, maybe even a top 3 finish when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I was just looking. He lined up as a wide receiver on 40% of his snaps in week 1. 15 total snaps as wide receiver. 11 of those came in the slot. So McDaniel's doing his voodoo. He said, we're going to put you here, here, and here, get you matched up on linebackers and nickel corners, and we're just going to use you all over the field. And it was really exciting because you mentioned it. He got that red zone carry. Like that, outside of like the wide receiver, the end of the stat numbers, all of that, getting the red zone carry is a difference between Achane being like legitimate contender for RB1 overall and him having a good season. He's like the RB11. But if he continues to get those, you mentioned it, sky's the limit. Moving on to my running back studs of the week. First one, Kenneth Walker. Obviously, this guy I was super high on, so just wanted to show him some light. 20 carries, 100 yards, and a touchdown. 66% of snaps. Did leave a bit early with an abdomen injury. If it wasn't for that injury, he probably wouldn't have been over 70% of snaps, which is basically what we're looking for when it comes to RB1 workhorses. He said he's fine. We'll see the practice reports on Wednesday. Of course, we know he has a very lengthy injury history so far in his early career, but so far so good from Kenneth Walker. 2 next guys are just guys that were in timeshares that we weren't really sure who was the RB1, but through 1 week, I think we have a bit of a clearer picture. Tony Pollard, clear RB1 so far through 1 week in the Titans backfield. He played 61% of snaps to Spears' 45, turned into 16 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Also had 4 targets and 3 receptions through the air. Spears, on the other hand, only had 8 total touches and really didn't turn it into anything much at all. I will say that 2 things. Number one, this was a Tony Pollard game script. This was a game they were up 17-0, win 17-3 at halftime, so they were able to run the ball. In other games, when they're down, when they're trailing, we could see more Spears. And Callahan also said after the game that they wanted to be closer to a 50-50 split. So actions speak louder than words. We'll see what happens next week. But I thought Pollard looked pretty damn good. That touchdown run was pretty impressive as well. So if you drafted Tony Pollard in round 8, round 9 as your RB3 most likely, or if you just went hero RB build and he's your RB2, got to feel good so far. And another guy was Brian Robinson. He was someone that I was trying to target in a lot of late rounds of drafts and get him in many places, but I thought he was one of the best deals. Last year, weeks 1 through 11, he was the RB4. He's been really solid for fantasy. And this game really interests me because it was a negative game script for Washington. And Washington's probably going to be in a lot of negative game scripts when they're coming back from games. They're constantly going to be trailing because the defense is terrible. But this should be the Eckler game. This is the game where Austin Eckler, when you're losing, he should be the guy who's out there getting the looks, getting the catches. And although Eckler was certainly involved, right? He had 4 catches for 48, 50 yards or so. Brian Robinson was more involved. 56% of snaps. Eckler was around 53%. 15 touches, 40 yards rushing, 49 yards receiving. Eckler only had 2 total carries, 4 catches, as I mentioned before. So Brian Robinson looks to be the RB1 in this offense. Tony Pollard looks to be like the RB1 in their offense. Again, if you're on the opposite sides, you drafted Tajay Spears, you drafted Austin Eckler. It's not over yet, but through 1 week, Pollard, Brian Robinson look to be the guys in those backfields.
Before we get on to the running back duds, let's read some super chats real quick. Shout out to Corey. Said, start the petition to get Joel a Brock Purdy jersey. He might pass out and die if that's the case, truthfully. The Fifth Down podcast, shout out, says, as a Giants fan, the only thing that made me smile this weekend was seeing the Jets lose. Drew, you off the Giants? I understand if so. See you in 3 years. I respect that. Listen, I love Giants fans. I love the Giants team as a whole, as an organization. They're a pretty great historic franchise, but I can't support what the product is that they're putting out right now. And it really starts with the quarterback. I'm done with Daniel Jones. I'm done with everything that he stands for. It's over. Shout out to Ty. He says, no Greenlaw, Hufanga next time might be worse. He's honestly right. Jay Wash says, Drew, is this the year Tua officially becomes a better quarterback than Rodgers? He was a better quarterback than him last year, and he was arguably a better quarterback than him 2 years ago. If you were watching, you would know that. Nestor Soto, shout out to the donation. Appreciate you, brother. Says, Drew, I need you to stand on 10 toes when talking about Tua. We Dolphins fans love you, so talk your shit, King. Listen, one thing's for certain. I'm always going to stand with the Dolphins, and I'm always going to stand with my brother Tua Tagovailoa. But you know what? It comes to a time where my guy's going to ball out in September. He's going to ball out in October. He's going to ball out in November, in December. I believe in him. I trust in him. But you know what? How sweet it's going to be when he finally does go out there in December and January, inevitably, and ball out. He's going to validate us. He's going to validate, no doubt about it. I believe in him. We just got to be patient. Jay Wash, another donation. First off, you're the GOAT. Secondly, what is the biggest fantasy bust that either of y'all have ever drafted in fantasy? Big shout out to the Fantasy Reaction Show. Darren Waller last season
Eddie
was
Lacy.
Atrocious. Eddie Lacy
in round one.
Right? Okay, I believe you.
Shit, there's a lot. I mean, damn, how long do we have? Devontae Freeman, I was drafting like 3 years in a row, and he was just never good.
I drafted David Montgomery his rookie season in like round 3. That was pretty terrible. I drafted AB the year that he was on the Raiders and New England in round like 2.
I drafted Adrian Peterson the year he got suspended.
That one was unfortunate as sin. But nothing. I mean, we've gotten some bad ones. It's not like we're perfect. We're far from perfect. But let's go on to our running back duds. First one, DeAndre Swift, RB 39, 10 carries, 30 yards, no catches, 5 fantasy points. Nothing good came from the Chicago Bears offense. Nothing that you can be excited about. However, moving forward, I believe that DeAndre Swift will be a little bit more involved in the passing game. He's shown to be very efficient when it comes to that. Has some very solid hands, but hasn't been the greatest when it comes to a running back and his vision. But this was an overall bad performance for the Bears. I look forward to seeing how they move forward. Next, Zamir White. This one's concerning because a lot of people that went the RB hero strategy probably have Zamir White as their RB2 or maybe even their RB3. RB 43 this past weekend, 13 carries, 44 yards, 2 catches, 2 targets, 2 yards, 3.6 fantasy points. Lost a fumble as well. But this is where things become concerning. The snap count between the running backs, there were out of 60 plays, Zamir White was on the field for 23. The other 36 were taken up by Alexander Madison, who was able to score a touchdown as well. Definitely outperformed Zamir White. Probably one of the better fantasy days of those that are on the waiver wire for free agent running backs outside of maybe a Jordan Mason. But this is not something that I love to see, especially someone who has Zamir White in a lot of leagues as my RB3. This was a guy that maybe better days would come. Maybe he got into the doghouse because he did fumble that football. But I don't love what I saw out of him. I don't love the opportunities that the Raiders took away from him. It's not a pretty sight for him. Someone that we were not the highest on coming into the season, but one that you were kind of taking an eye on because of how efficient he was towards the end of the season. But there always was that worry of what could be Zamir White this upcoming season. And the last one was a guy that I mentioned a little bit earlier, a guy that I do have as my RB2 in my one league that I care a lot about. And this was a mistake. Raheem Mostert, RB 49, 6 rushes, 9 yards, could get nothing going. 2 catches, 3 targets, 10 yards, 2.9 fantasy points. Again, like I mentioned, this is Devon's team. And if that's going to be the case, Raheem Mostert, I'm waiting maybe a couple of weeks before just actively going out and dropping him. But this was not a great performance by him. It's a good Jaguars rush defense, which is why I'm going to be patient with Raheem Mostert. but I am panicking. I'm pushing the panic button when it comes to Raheem Mostert, because even on the goal line, where all last season, that was his bread and butter, they did not use him, and he was not the guy that got that red zone touchdown. It was Devon Achane. So I am panicking, and I may be looking over some other options, but right now, it's one of those that I'm forced into a position where I kind of have to stash him and wait and see.
Yeah, and this is also, of course, the first game without Robert Hunt, first game without Connor Williams. So it's possible that the rush blocking unit in totality is just not as strong as it was last year. Just so you guys know, because I see shout out to Manuel Brown again asking about Saquon. There's gonna be some dudes in the stud section that we're just not gonna go over, like Tyreek Hill. He's amazing. Saquon, he's amazing. I think mostly, at least what I did, and seems like what Drew did too. More than anything, there's just guys that we want to talk about one way or another, for good or for bad. Like, we know that Saquon was going to be that dude and probably score touchdowns and have a lot of yards, right? But these other guys, like we have in the dud section, I think are either more interesting conversations or just players that are a bit more, concerning, panic button-y than Saquon or, other guys. So to talk about a couple of my duds, Jonathan Taylor enters this list, 16 carries for 48 yards, did end up getting a touchdown, which saved his day from a terrible day to at least didn't kill you type of day. The good news, though, he played 95% of snaps, which is just insane. It was the most among all running backs this past week. And one thing to keep track of, the Colts ran by far. Actually, I don't know what the Jets ran, so maybe I got to double check. But the bottom two in terms of offensive plays ran this week, just 43 plays. Part of that is because Anthony Richardson, this offense, it was either like 3 and out or a 60-yard touchdown bomb. They didn't have many long sustaining drives. He had 4 rushes in the red zone area. So not worried about JT yet. The only thing that is very upsetting is 0 targets. Anthony Richardson, we know, has not been targeting his running backs through his first 4 or 5 games throughout his NFL career. And so far in year 2, that has not changed. Derrick Henry was someone we went over a bit on Thursday when they had their opening game against the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not too worried about Derrick Henry. This is a guy that was drafted as a top 10 running back. More than anything, this was just game script dependent. There's not going to be a ton of games where the Ravens are losing, in my opinion. So Derrick Henry should get more work. And even still, in a game that he ends up losing, where Justice Hill plays like 50-something% of snaps and gets damn near 10 targets, he still was used on the goal line. He still got a touchdown. Didn't kill you this week. Last one, though, is Travis Etienne, which is a bit more concerning, definitely more concerning than the 2 guys before him. He should have had 2 touchdowns, number 1 overall. Shout out to Javon Holland, made one of the best plays, probably a game-saving strip fumble to prevent a touchdown. After Etienne fumbled, Tank Bigsby out-touched him 5-3. Before that, it was all Travis Etienne, 37 snaps, Tank Bigsby 17. And Bigsby looked good. Like, he wasn't out there just kind of trucking along, getting like 2-3 yards to carry. Tank Bigsby really did look good. So, again, it's week 1. We're not panicking yet. Etienne should still be that guy. But when everyone's going out and spending on J.K. Dobbins, Isaiah Likely, all of these dudes that are getting a ton of hype, throw a few dollars on Tank Bigsby. Because if this ends up being kind of a 1-2-headed punch, both guys could be valuable.
Yeah, Tank Bigsby is definitely a guy that I'm looking forward to on that waiver wire with that team that I have Raheem Mostert. It's one of those that, hey, you have to pivot sometimes. You have to understand, made a mistake here, and you got to go ahead and you got to adjust accordingly. I'm actively looking to find my RB2, and sometimes that's what you got to do. You got to go ahead and you got to find the low-key guy and something that's cheap so that in the long term right now, outside of maybe a Jordan Mason, and if J.K. Dobbins is available on waiver wires, where in that league for me, J.K. isn't available, you got to go ahead and you got to take some flyers, especially in an opportunity like this where Tank Bigsby looked a little bit better to me than Travis Etienne did this past weekend. So Joel is 100% right in his thought process there. Let's go over to the wide receiver studs. First off, my brother in Christ, Jameson Williams. We always knew, we always believed he just needed a little bit of time. Wide receiver 4 this past weekend, 5 catches, 9 targets. That's what gets me going. 9 targets. He was heavily involved in this offense this past weekend on prime time, 121 yards, a bomb touchdown that was underthrown by Jared Goff. And I've been saying this to you for God knows how long. When it comes to the deep ball, Jared Goff simply doesn't have it when it comes to Jameson Williams. But Jameson's so good. He's able to still track the ball, scored the touchdown, was even able to get a carry for 13 yards, 21.9 fantasy points. This is the year. He's going to be the breakout guy. And it's Mike Evans, wide receiver 5 now. You mentioned how we don't name the big name guys, but I felt obligated to mention Mike Evans because I was a little bit lower on Mike coming into the season. I didn't think that the touchdowns were sustainable, carried in from one year to the next, especially as he gets older in his career. But he went and said, shut the hell up, Andrew. You don't know what the hell you're talking about because I'm still one of them ones, and I go out there and I drop 2 touchdowns on you like it's nothing. It's the Commanders. But nevertheless, 2 touchdowns is 2 touchdowns. And finishing as the wide receiver 5, regardless of the week, is always going to get you some praise and some recognition. Now, I have to show some love also to Stephon Diggs because we were pretty crucial, especially me, or critical, I should say, of Stephon Diggs after leaving the Buffalo Bills. Now, ironically enough, he didn't have that amazing of a game when it came to 6 catches, 6 targets, 33 yards. But what was awesome and what always gets you a great finish in fantasy is getting to the end zone. He had 2 of them things, 2 touchdowns. He goes and has 18.9 fantasy points, finishes as the wide receiver 9. He was heavily involved in this offense. Stephon Diggs is not one of those guys there that we were very high on Tank Dell. Of course, we love Nico Collins, and Nico Collins was awesome in his own right, had over 100 yards. But if Stephon Diggs is going to be one of those guys that CJ Stroud's looking to early and often, hey, sometimes you have to accept when you're wrong, and Stephon Diggs can have a top 20 finish. He can be a top 15 guy, especially if he's going to get into the end zone the way that he did. But again, one of those wait and sees. There's so many mouths to feed. But we did see Joe Mixon go out there and ball. We did see Nico Collins go out there and ball. Tank Dell was the odd man out this past weekend, but Stephon Diggs was able to go out there and have damn near 20 fantasy points. So to me, this is going to be a fun offense to watch. It's going to be an explosive one. And with how great CJ Stroud is, I can fully anticipate seeing him get all these guys and make them fantasy relevant. But inevitably, some weeks aren't going to be their weeks.
Absolutely. I'm going to talk about another Texans receiver in the dud section. But moving on to a few of the studs I wanted to highlight. Cooper Kupp, all the way back. 21 targets, 44% target share, which is just absolutely absurd. Basically, half of Matt Stafford's targets were going to Cooper Kupp. Turned to 14 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown. He was the first read on all 21 targets, which is just insane. Basically, Matt Stafford was looking his way. I'm throwing it to you every single time Cooper Kupp got the ball. We also just got the news that Puka Nacua is going on IR. Brutal blow. A terrible blow to this Rams offense. Probably a pretty big blow to Matt Stafford as well, just from like a weekly ceiling point of view. But for Cooper Kupp, unfortunately, like in the grand scheme of things, it's probably really good news. Like this 20 targets, maybe he doesn't get 21 every week, but he feels like a lock for 15 targets. And you drafted him in 2 QB leagues. I got him in around like 4 or 5, and 1 QB leagues in like round 3. And he's a guy that, at least while Puka's out, he has top 5 upside weekly. And even when Puka's in the lineup, what he showed in that first half is he's probably going to be a top 10 receiver, knock on wood, he's able to stay healthy. Brian Thomas, wide receiver, 17 on the week. Nothing groundbreaking. 4 receptions, 47 yards, and a touchdown. But he also caused a 50-yard defensive pass interference when he beat Jalen Ramsey one-on-one. The touchdown was also on Jalen Ramsey. He was the highest grade rookie by PFF. That moves anybody, moves some people, sometimes moves nobody, but thought it was noteworthy. Me. But more than anything, he looked good. He looked comfortable. And he's going to contribute on a team that has a borderline top 10 quarterback that is desperate for a wide receiver 1. It's probably going to take some time where you could really trust him in your lineup. But if you drafted him, round 9, round 10, as kind of a late flyer, maybe the first or second guy off your bench, you have to love what you saw through 1 week of the season. Last name up, it sucks he's on here because the next 4 weeks are probably not going to play him, but Jaden Reed. He was sensational. He was fantastic. The wide receiver 1 on the week. Unfortunately, Malik Willis is going to be the quarterback, and I'm not interested in starting really any Green Bay Packer. If you have Josh Jacobs, go out and start Josh Jacobs because you probably don't have a better option. But Jaden Reed looked fantastic on Friday night.
The real always knew that Jaden Reed was a wide receiver 1. And Mr. Dehls, you got to put some respect on Jaden Reed's name. He's a baller. He's a baller. And that man has a nose for the end zone. Showed it this past Friday. But you're goddamn right. For 4 weeks, I can't even think about putting him in my lineup with Malik Willis as quarterback. If you are a manager and you have any stock in the Packers, you have to be praying to the good Lord that the Packers decide to bring in Ryan Tannehill, because Malik Willis is not it. But shout out to BTJ. And I'm glad you showed him some love because he deserved it. Let's move on to the wide receiver duds. And this one's going to be a little bit fun because all three of the guys I have listed here, I'm not worried about, not even a little bit, but they were terrible. Wide receiver 72, my brother, my guy, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 6 targets, 3 catches, 13 yards, 2.8 fantasy points. Do I think that this is ever going to happen again? Absolutely not. Is this the worst game of Amon-Ra's career? Probably, especially while he's been the guy. But do I think this will continue? No. Game script simply was out of his hands. They were running the ball a ton. They obviously were heavily favoring Jameson Williams because of that matchup. The separation that JMO was able to get. Amon-Ra's script was simply not there. Is he going to be better? Absolutely. Don't panic. And if you're one of those guys that are panicking, hit my line. I will happily trade for him. Wink, wink, Joel Dehls. Devontae Adams comes in as my next dud. Wide receiver 34, 6 catches, 6 targets, 5 catches, 59 yards, 8.4 fantasy points. Not great, especially against a Chargers defense with Gardner Minshew as your quarterback. Again, I'm not worried too much about it. He's Devontae Adams. He's going to get his opportunity, but it was an ugly game and an ugly performance by the Raiders offense as a whole. And the last name, and this one hurts me the most because I have too much stock in this guy, Marvin Harrison Jr., 1 catch, 4 yards. That's it. 0.9 points. I mean, you want to talk about the gut punch of the weekend. It's that right there. Marvin Harrison against the Buffalo Bills. I get that the Buffalo Bills have a solid secondary. I get that it was his first game. I cannot believe the outcome that was. Now, did he have a touchdown wide open that Kyler Murray missed? 100%. Did that kill me inside? 1,000%. Do I think that he will bounce back? Undoubtedly. He's simply too talented. To whoever in the comment section saying, oh, but he's supposed to be generational. Trust the process. He's amazing. He was getting open. They just need to go ahead and throw the ball his way. And I anticipate that going forward. But wide receiver 99, it's not what you want.
99's hilarious. 99's hilarious. I'll go on to move on to some of my duds. These guys have wavering impacts in terms of number one, importance, and number two, just kind of my worry of them. First up, Tank Dell, right? We were wondering this Texans wide receiver room, how it would shake up. We saw, you mentioned Stephon Diggs. We saw Nico Collins, who we didn't mention in the studs, but he's a fucking stud. We knew this. He was our top 10. I think both of us number 10 wide receiver for a reason. But Tank Dell was someone that out of all three was probably the least impressive, the most disappointing this week. 3 receptions for 40 yards, did see 7 targets. And what was the most interesting was at first glance, he only was out there on 63% of snaps, which felt kind of low. But when I looked in some information on Twitter, I wish I saw the person who tweeted out, he was subbed out on basically every single run play, right? When you look back at last season, when he broke his leg, unfortunately, it was on that run play on the end zone or in the red zone. So they probably were playing just a little bit cautious because he ran 87% of the team routes. So when it was a passing play, he was out there on the field. So I'm not too worried about Tank Dell, but he does feel the most volatile out of all these receivers. I think Nico Collins, the clear number 1 alpha wide receiver on this team. He is the dude you want. Wide receiver 2, at least for fantasy, this is Stephon Diggs is going to be that short to intermediate guy. I think he already showed early on in the red zone. CJ Stroud has his trust. And then Tank Dell is really the third option where he can create explosive plays any given moment. He could take a screen pass to the house. He can go over the top for 60 yards. But he's also going to have these games where Nico Collins goes for 110 yards. Stephon Diggs is the one that gets a touchdown in the end zone. And Joe Mixon's back there looking like a rejuvenated Joe Mixon. He's averaging 5 yards a carry. So Tank Dell, I think he was drafted for most people probably as your flex, maybe first player off the bench. And so far through 1 week, I don't think he's elevated more than that. Next player, Keenan Allen. This one's interesting because Rome is dealing with a knee injury. He was labeled as week to week, so decent chance he misses next week. And I think Keenan Allen, although it was a brutal week 1, is probably a sneaky start. I have to look at the matchup for week 2 because there was 2 plays that could have completely turned around the week for Keenan Allen. He had a drop touchdown pass in the end zone, a ball 100% he should have caught. and then another potential 30-plus yard gain with the possibility, if he makes one guy miss, to have another touchdown on the left sideline that Caleb just overthrew with a little bit of pressure in his face as he was kind of fading backwards and throwing it. Still had 11 targets, 38% target share. That was more than DJ Moore, and he got open often. He had 5 targets, or excuse me, he was credited with 5 open targets that were 5+ yards down the field. The only players with more were Cooper Kupp, Wan'Dale Robinson, shout out to Giants, everyone loves Wan'Dale, and Cortland Sutton, believe it or not, was also targeted or credited with 6 targets, 5+ yards down the field that were deemed open. Then the last player I want to mention, I saw someone in the comments talk about him too. It's A.D. Mitchell. And it's because A.D. Mitchell should have had a huge day. And the Alec Pierce, who ended up being like a top 5 receiver this week, it could have easily been A.D. Mitchell as well. There were 2 touchdowns that were basically wide open that unfortunately Anthony Richardson just missed. He still saw 5 targets. 4 of the 5 were deemed open. I just liked his talent coming out of Texas. I liked him as a prospect. He kind of started off a little bit slow in training camp, but as time went on, he gained some trust. And I think he can carve out a role on this offense. I think he can. But on the other hand, Josh Downs is probably going to come back within the next couple of weeks. Michael Pittman, of course, is still there as your wide receiver 1. And I don't know what to do with Alec Pierce. I thought Alec Pierce was more or less dead entering this season from a fantasy standpoint, where he's someone that wasn't really involved in the offense with Gardner Minshew, really wasn't involved too much his rookie season. Then he goes out there and he's catching like 60-yard bombs for Anthony Richardson as a top 5 receiver. So A.D. Mitchell, I still think there's a world where he can be involved, but don't look at like the 0.9 points if he even scored that this week and be like, oh, he didn't do anything. He was open. He was open often. He just couldn't link up with Anthony Richardson.
Now, the funny thing about this next part of the show is going to be us ignoring tight end studs. We're not doing it. We're going right to tight end duds.
Can I give one shout out? Can I give us one shout out for tight ends? Because it was my sit of the week and I was wrong. Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers he's going to be something. He led the team in targets. He was used all over the field. He was used in line in the slot like we saw in the preseason. He ended up having a decent statistical day. For the tight end position, he was like a top 5 tight end this week. He was actually really damn good. But Brock Bowers, his first debut, coming off the injury, rookie, all of that stuff, had a really good day.
Now, it's funny you say that because we'll have to sneeze, and hopefully it doesn't come while I'm mid-talking. It might. We're going to go by my tight end duds, and one's going to be tight end 8. The next one's going to be tight end 10. And I say that they're duds to me because 4 catches for 45 yards is not good enough when you are drafted in the 3rd round like Sam Laporta was. Trey McBride, 5 receptions, 45 yards, 5.5 fantasy points is not good enough for being around a 4th, 5th round pick. It's not good enough. I understand for the tight end position, tight end 8, tight end 10. You hear that? Oh, that's pretty solid. It just goes to show you how bad of a fantasy week it was for fantasy tight ends. These guys will be better. I do anticipate that. But the last one, Evan Ingram, tight end 43. This was truly one of the worst tight end performances. 1 catch, 5 yards. That's it. 4 targets. Not great. Of course, Joel's going to go through some other duds, and I'm going to have words to say about that one guy. However, these guys weren't great in their own right, but I'm anticipating all of these guys to have bounce back weeks.
Yeah, basically, if you drafted a tight end, like one of the first 8 tight ends, they were probably terrible. A couple names that were duds. The first one, he was a dud, but I think he's like worth monitoring. Tucker Kraft. We were wondering entering this season, is it going to be Kraft? Is it going to be Musgrave? Kraft played 95% of snaps. That was the 4th highest for any skill position, wide receiver, running back, and tight end. He didn't do much with it, but compared to Luke Musgrave, who only played on 25% of snaps, we know Tucker Kraft is that dude. Don't pick him up. Wait till Jordan Love gets back. And if you have some injury, if you just have an open roster spot, put someone on IR. Tucker Kraft, I think, has some talent to be like a streamable tight end and plus matchups. But let's talk about the guy you want to talk about. Dalton Kincaid, my guy, star of the week, all of the above. He was bad. I'm not worried. I don't really care. He didn't produce, but he played 88% of snaps. He was out there for 83% of team routes. Better days are ahead for Dalton Kincaid, right? We could talk about Trey McBride. We talk about Travis Kelce. We talk about Mark Andrews. All of these elite tight ends we're not panicking on just yet. Give it some time. It's going to be fine. Last name I want to throw out there.
I hate him. I'm
He's
ready to
fine.
say I hate
It'll
him.
be fine. It'll be fine. Dalton Schultz, someone that we didn't really talk about a ton, but just has kind of some name value. I think formerly being a Cowboy, having a solid season last year, getting the contract extension. And this offense, I think he's just going to be forgotten about. You have 3 receivers who are too good. You have Joe Mixon, who apparently can just get 30 carries any given week. So Dalton Schultz, if you have a guy like, even guys who didn't produce, like a Pat Fryermuth, who I think just has a chance to get more opportunity. Even Taysom Hill, who I think has more of a chance to get opportunity, although he didn't produce a ton this past week. Dalton Schultz is just someone that it's basically touchdown or nothing. And I know that's kind of like that tight end 12 to 18 range. That's how most of those guys are. But at least give me a guy that has a chance to be the number 2 option in their offense.
Yeah, and you know what? You did the right thing by mentioning your sit of the week as a stud, and I'll do the same with mine actually, because Kyle Pitts was able to get into the end zone, and honestly, that was good enough for him to be a top 3 tight end at the position. Didn't do much else though. 3 catches, around 30 yards, but was able to get into the end zone. And obviously, that's good enough to salvage a fantasy performance if you are a tight end. So I'll give him some credit there. But again, not the best week for fantasy tight ends. Not at all. But some great performances that we saw. We went through our studs. We went through our duds. We gave you some action when he came to the waiver wire. I think that the obvious notables when we talk about waiver wire ads after tonight, Jordan Mason. If you didn't draft him, if you are a CMC manager, you have to make sure that that's your number 1 priority. J.K. Dobbins, if he's available, you have to go out there and get him because he's going to be one of the more explosive guys, especially on a run-first team like the Chargers are playing to be. At the tight end position, Isaiah Likely, he's most likely available. You have to go out there and get him because him and Lamar Jackson have an obvious connection. Those are my top 3 go and gets. You have to make sure you prioritize those 3 guys over everyone else. But that's going to do it from our time over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show. We'll be back here on Thursday night after the Bills, after the Dolphins game, of course, recapping the game, but then giving our starts of the week. If you made it past this whole video, 1, we appreciate you guys showing some love. But 2, go ahead, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, put on the notification bell so you know when we go live like nights like tonight. But that's going to do it from us over here, and we'll see you guys next time.